And I'm back for part 2 of the Foxwoods recap. I know it's been quite a while since my last tournament recap video. I've been busy with a lot of stuff, but I am committed to try to catch you up to date with all my latest tournaments. And so let's get back right into the swing of things. So Foxwoods, I had finished day 1 on 3 out of 3, having beaten 2 significantly lower rated players, but 1 higher rated player in a very intense game. And this is now the second day of the tournament, and I am on board 1 because I'm on a perfect 3 out of 3, playing, I believe, the only other guy, or maybe there were just a few people left on a perfect score. This guy is in his 30s, expert. I'm black. He opens with knight of 3. And what I like to do against knight of 3 is I like to play d6, which is aiming to prepare e5, and so he plays the most principled move d4, shutting that down. And from there, we basically transpose into a King's Indian, where he takes the center, I castle, and most common moves here, bishop e2, sometimes white will play bishop e3 or h3. He, in this position, played g3, which to me was strange, because normally when white goes for a fianchetto, they will not play e4, they'll play g3, and then they'll play bishop g2 like this. So when he played g3, I was like, this is strange. There has to be something wrong with this. There has to be a reason why people don't usually play this here. So I, of course, play e5, most standard King's Indian move, trying to attack the center immediately. He goes bishop g2. And here I kind of missed my opportunity to more or less punish him for this weird move order. Now, in the game, I actually considered the move knight c6, but I thought after d5, where does my knight go? If it goes to d4, it gets captured. If it goes back, that doesn't look too good either. But what I didn't realize is that this move is actually pretty strong for black, and this is basically like the refutation to this incorrect fianchetto move order, because here, white cannot take on d4. What I didn't realize in the game, although this is kind of a thematic idea, black has this very cool sacrifice. Knight takes e4, point being that it's a discovered attack on the queen, and if queen takes, then there's this move rook e8, and there goes the queen. So that doesn't work, and if he goes back with knight e2, then the e4 pawn is under pressure. So yeah, I really should have gone for that. Instead, I just played kind of the more solid knight d7, and so we get kind of this standard sort of fianchetto King's Indian position, which I don't really like these positions. Even though, black does okay here, but it always felt to me like it's hard to play. Like, black gets squeezed. I know the plans of the rook e8, c6, stuff like that. Sometimes black will take on d4 and, put a knight on c5. But I decided, let's try something a little bit new. And so I played the move b6, which is quite rare in this position. It's actually been played less than 50 times in the master database compared to the thousands of times that moves like rook e8 or c6 have been seen. But I decided to go for it. I was kind of experimenting with a lot of these double fianchetto setups at the time. And he decided to play h3, kind of like, a waiting move. And so I go bishop e7, aiming at the pawn, and I was expecting him to play rook e1, and then I was thinking maybe to take, and then I was a little bit scared of some ideas with him playing e5 and opening the diagonal. Turns out it doesn't quite work here, but I was a little bit scared of that. But then he played d5, and this is already maybe not a mistake, but in my opinion, kind of a strategic inaccuracy, because when he plays d5, it looks good at first because he shuts out my bishop, but at the same time, he closes the center, and this gives me all the play I can ask for. I immediately put the knight on c5, attacking the e4 pawn. He has to defend it. He chooses a pretty kind of good way to defend, and that's to play knight e1, which opens the bishop, but he's also aiming to bring his knight to d3 to challenge my good knight on c5. I just play a5 to prevent him from playing b4. He goes knight d3, and he wants to trade off my knight, but I can reinforce it with knight to d7. And I have a very straightforward King's Indian plan. I'm going to play f5, and because the position is closed, I have all the time in the world to actually put my bishop back on c8 onto the diagonal where it's going to be best suited. And he told me after the game he kind of underestimated this maneuver, the fact that I have time to do this without any problems. So he just kind of played pretty solidly. He played b3, and now I decided to take, put my knight on c5, and rip f5. And at this point, I'm happy because, I mean, this is kind of like a very nice position for a King's Indian. He cannot take the pawn because I take back with the bishop, and I basically skewer him here. I mean, he can try to block with the knight, but already his position is a little bit unpleasant. He decides to go king h2, kind of anticipating that if I take, his h3 pawn won't hang at the end. So he plays king h2, and I decide, I was thinking, do I take on e4? Do I play f4, which is better? I decided, let's push. Let's push. Let's go for a standard kind of King's Indian attack and try to create some, aggressive ideas. He goes rook e1 here. I should mention he doesn't really want to take because, first of all, that opens the bishop. Second of all, this pawn is becoming dangerous. So he goes rook e1, basically creating the possibility for his bishop to come to f1 if I were to push. But I'm going to keep the pawn on f4, and I'm thinking, how do I sort of create an attack around it? And I decided the best way is to bring in the queen and actually put the queen on h5, because now I have a lot of pressure against this pawn over here, and I have a plan of actually rushing the g-pawn now to, put it under maximum pressure. He has to react. He plays b4, after which I take and drop the knight back to a6. And now he has to be careful because even though I don't have any immediate threats at this moment, the pressure is mounting. At any moment, I might be able to take on g3, open the f-file. I have, once again, ideas of sacking on h3. So he goes back with knight to d1, and I go g5. And he realizes at this moment that he has to be very careful because let's say he plays some slow move like bishop d2. I am actually going to finally take and play g4. And he cannot defend his bishop. The pawns are advancing. His king is close to being in a mating net. So he plays actually a move which seems like crazy, but it works, and that's rook h1. Idea being now if I take, he can go king g1, or actually he can take first and then move his king, and if I take, he can take with the rook. And actually his rook is now a pretty solid defender. I can even, force his king back and do this, but I saw this and I didn't see how I'm going to break through. My own pawn is in the way. So instead of getting reckless, I decided to be a little bit more precise. I said, let's move the bishop in. Let's play bishop g4, and I'm aiming to either go to f3 or e2. He goes bishop d2, and I decided to play bishop f3. Now, it turns out this might have been a little bit imprecise. Better may have been to go to e2 to kind of play the whole board, so to speak, because it's easy just to focus on the king side, but actually, at least what the computer really likes is this idea of b5. I didn't really consider this in the game, but if I can kind of break up a structure here, then I'm kind of doing well on both sides of the board. But, of course, I was focused on the king side. I played bishop f3, and I kind of got lucky because I had not even realized that my queen is very close to being trapped. And he did not see the idea, but he could have, in this position, played the move g4. And it turns out my queen has to go to a3. That's its only safe square. But now the problem is it gets attacked, and the only move to save it is to take this pawn, but then he has to just shift the queen out of the way, and basically I lose the knight for a pawn. Now I have some compensation. I can still try to create counterplay because the rook is coming over, and it apparently has to give a pawn back, but things get really messy, and it's no longer clear that I'm better. He, however, he was getting low on time, actually. He, when you're defending all game, it puts a lot of psychological pressure on you, and he was getting low on time. We're only 25 moves into the game, and he already had maybe 10 minutes left. And he played rook e1, but this allows me to play rook f6, and I'm trying to kind of swing my rook over. He plays rook b3, and I go back. He plays g4 now. He's trying to sort of shut down the king side. I play queen h4. And this was kind of the critical moment. I mean, he had only a few minutes left on the clock, and he sort of collapsed, unfortunately, because he needed to play queen d3 basically keep his queen around to protect this area. But he played rook f3, trying to blockade the pawn, which turned out to be a big mistake, because now I play h5. And I'm playing these moves pretty quickly because I know I'm keeping him under pressure, plus it's fairly straightforward. I'm attacking, he goes rook g1, trying to defend. Should mention that if he takes, g4, game over, because rook has to move away, he can't take as the pin, and the pawns are just going to suffocate him. So he played rook g1, but I played rook h6, and that's it. He's in trouble, because if he doesn't take, I'm going to, let's say he plays some move like this, I'm going to take, and I can actually take his rook because of the pin. If he does take, though, and he did, now I simply take back, and he still cannot prevent this push. He gets his king out of the G file, or out of the H file. I go here, and he can't take even, because then his rook is basically getting lost. He has to move his king back. I'll take. C brings his rook across, and now I can smell the blood in the water. I go check. His king has to go back. I take the pawn. King has to go over, and he's playing these moves like he has less than a minute now. He's basically playing an increment. And what did I play to basically wrap this game up? Queen to g2. Very cool idea I found. Basically, it shows how discoordinated his pieces are. Because this knight and this bishop are actually getting in the way of the king, and I have some back rank ideas. If he takes, I have back rank checkmate. Now, he could have taken the rook. That would have made things a little bit, at least, a little bit trickier. But I still win material because I take the rook and then take the bishop with check. But he played rook f1. And final move of the game, can you guess what I played? I simply took the rook. And he resigned because he missed that after king takes queen. Rook h1 is checkmate. But to be fair, the game was already over. Basically, at the point where I broke through here, the game was already over. So that was a pretty emphatic victory. I mean, he was defending pretty well up until a certain point. But, you know, defending is tough, and especially when you get low on time. And so I managed to get off to a 4 out of 4 start. In the fifth game, which was the second game of the second day, I had white against a kid around 2100, and I'm not going to show it because I basically settled for a repetition fairly early on. I took a draw. I was a little bit better, but I wasn't really comfortable in the position. I didn't really know how to make progress, and so even though the engine was saying like it was maybe +1, +1.5, I decided to settle for a draw, something I may or may not later regret, but I finished the first 2 days on 4.5 out of 5. All I got to do now is finish the tournament strong. So here we are, the final day of Foxwoods tournament. I am going into it on 4.5 out of 5, about to face the only other person on 4.5 out of 5, a kid, around 13 years old, rating just under 2100. And the thing about the last day of tournaments is usually the round starts earlier. And when that's the case, it's important to, you know, adapt and be well rested. But when I woke up that morning, I was just feeling a little bit off. Sometimes before a game, I'll try to do some tactics, some puzzles on my phone to kind of get warmed up. And I was doing some on lead chess, and I was just not getting these puzzles right. Like, I could just tell I was a little bit off, just not sharp. So I was hoping, all right, maybe because it's a classical game, I'll have time to think. I'll be able to overcome that. And so opponent plays e4. I play d6, standard lion stuff. He goes f4, which is known as the anti-Philidor. White tries to go aggressive, take the center with 3 pawns. I have to fight back with e5. He plays the queen takes line, which is a pretty aggressive option. And on bishop e3, I play the thematic d5. There's the idea in these positions, black is willing to sacrifice a pawn because I have this bishop c5 move and I can get some initiative, queen e7, try to pressure against his kind of open king. He, though, decided to castle, which is a move which I was not really expecting. Usually people will either take or they'll play e5, but okay, castles. I play bishop c5, and he goes back to d2, which I felt was strange, but again, because I was like not feeling sharp that morning, it took me almost 10 minutes to realize that I have to now follow up with another bishop move, bishop b4, punishing him for putting his queen in a pin that I can now exploit. Suddenly his e4 pawn is under a lot of pressure, and he has to move his queen again. So already I'm off to a good start. And here I considered a lot of things. I considered taking the knight, and then taking on e4 with the knight, but that allows queen takes g7. I considered taking by pawn, but I was just kind of worried that I was giving him too much of an initiative. Like, I thought I castle, he plays knight f5, and the knight's pinned. Now, in hindsight, this is just, like, ridiculous that I didn't go for this. I'm up a pawn here. He doesn't have any threats, but I was just kind of seeing ghosts. And so instead, I castled. But this allows him to play e5. And now things are not so easy for me, because if I play knight g4, he has knight g5. Now he attacks h7, and I have to block, and then he has, like, e6. And I was also scared of this. Turns out, again, if I had calculated further, I would have realized that actually I can allow this fork, because when he takes my rook, I take his bishop, and I'm actually doing fine. I'm actually better here. Or maybe it's maybe equal after knight takes e3, but, you know, perfectly playable. Instead, I took the knight, and I thought it'd be nice to plant the knight on e4. And I thought he'll move his queen back, and I'll, you know, play like queen c7 or something, maybe move this knight out of the way. And then he played queen a3. And I begin to realize that my position is just not good at all. It seems like, why is he putting his queen here, right? What does it do? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I try to do something of my own, like let's say I play b5, right? And he's going to attack my knight. Now this knight doesn't really have too many places it can go. It can't go to c5 because with the queen on a3, he has that square covered twice. If I try to defend the knight with f5, whoops, he pushes, he hits my knight, and once my knight moves, he has e7 forking the rook and the queen. So that is kind of the depth of his idea. Very nice by him. He found a really good spot for the queen. And now I'm thinking, how do I even like develop from here? I decided to play knight b6. Because now if he plays bishop d3, which he did, I can play f5 because my bishop covers the e6 square. Still though, I am allowing him a protected pass pawn, and this structure is a little bit flimsy. He could have taken en passant, and actually that would have been his strongest move, and planted the knight on e5. This does not look too good for me, because I'm dealing with the bishop pair. I don't really have much counterplay. He played a very ambitious move, though. He played g4, basically saying that if you take me, I'll take your knight, and you can't take back, because that's going to open up this pin. But I thought, okay, fine, I'm still going to take, because now I can take your knight. And so I thought, you know, what is this guy trying to do? Like, he's just going to take back, and I have knight c4 coming. I'm doing fine. And then he hits me with bishop takes knight. And I realize I messed up. I completely missed this move. And the problem for me is that I can't take with the pawn, because then queen takes rook. This pawn is pinned. And if queen takes, this is what, you know, of course I was relying on. What I missed is that he has this nasty deflection move, bishop takes h7. If I take his bishop, he takes my rook. And if I move the king, he can just storm with the pawns. He can take on f3. I am, you know, as good as lost here. And the worst part is that if I had just not rushed to take the knight, I might have realized that I actually had the intermezzo knight c4, getting the knight out of danger, hitting his queen. If he moves the queen, I can take his bishop or the knight, and if he tries some tricks with like knight check, I'm actually fine here. Like, material equalizes out, and I'm doing fine. I can plant the bishop on f5. Engine says maybe white is still slightly better. You know, he does still have a protected pass pawn, but perfectly playable. Instead, I'm faced with this mess of a position where I can't even take the bishop. So I decided to actually play queen h4. I thought, okay, at least I'm going to get something back. He has to save his bishop on e4. So he takes, actually, if he took the pawn, that would have allowed queen takes f4 with a check and a double attack against the bishop. So he drops back this way, I get the pawn, and I thought, okay, at least I get some compensation for the piece. I have two pawns, I have a pass pawn on f3. Still some hope. I decided not to take on e5 because I saw bishop d4 looked kind of annoying, and I thought I give him too much counterplay. So I played bishop h3, and my goal is to just quickly try to do something with the pawn. But to his credit, he managed to shut me down pretty well. He attacked my rook, I moved it. He got his bishop into d6, meaning I can never win the pawn now, and I have to watch out for e6 with a discovered attack. I get out of the way, and he basically just consolidates, gets his queen over, and he starts to counterattack me. I'm starting to get desperate. I played g5 to try to like cement this pawn on f3, but it becomes clear my position is hanging on by a thread. We trade bishops. I play c5. He swings over to attack the pawn. I have to defend it. He plays h4. I can't really take because that opens the g file, plus he can take this pawn here. So I play h6. He takes. I decided to take with the rook because I thought taking with the pawn is just too dangerous. But after he now takes my pawn, which I totally forgot about, and I give one check, I just had enough at this point. I resigned the game because he's going to force a trade of rooks. If the queens come off the board, he's just up a piece. Not to mention he has the pass pawn, and yeah, it's just everything is falling apart for me. So kind of a disastrous game. I just wasn't really sharp. I made some pretty bad decisions kind of coming out of the opening, and it cost me. So now it just remains to see if I can really finish the tournament strong. I mean, I still have a chance to finish in the money spots in round 7. So I'm not going to lie, I was a bit demoralized after my loss in the penultimate round, but there is one more game to go. Had some lunch with some friends, and time to play the last game. And I'm actually playing against an opponent who one of my friends had played, and against her he had played kind of like a Perk or a Modern, so that's what I was expecting. But then he played the Sicilian against me, so I was like, okay, maybe he wants to play the Dragon, because that's kind of like a Peertz. But he goes e6, the Scheveningen or Scheveningen, however you pronounce it, the Dutch word, named after a Dutch city, actually. This is a kind of an old school line of the Sicilian, which is not considered too favorable for black these days because white has a very aggressive move they can play, and that is g4, known as the Keres attack. And of course I play it because that's what I like to play in blitz. Why not play it here? He goes h6, I go h4. This is all pretty much theory. I'm playing this pretty quickly. He's kind of taking his time, but he obviously knows the theory. He goes h5 here. I take, I go bishop g5, and he goes knight f6. So this is kind of like the standard position where white has this rook on g1. They're kind of, being very aggressive on the king side. And now I play queen d2. He plays a6. The most common move is actually queen b6, after which usually I'll drop back, and then here black will play a6, maybe bishop d7, and sometimes black will castle, but white can be quick with like some f4 stuff. It gets very sharp. He plays a6 though. And this move I had remembered checking with the computer, and the most popular move in the database I think is still castling, but I remembered it saying that knight takes c6 is supposed to be pretty good for white. Actually like +1.5 or something. So I was like, all right, let's try it. He takes back, and I castle. And I'm feeling pretty confident at this point. I got plenty of time on the clock, and his position just looks bad. Like he has all these pawns on the 6th rank. He's far away from castling. He doesn't have many pieces developed. Like, what is he going to do? He thinks for 10 minutes, plays bishop b7. So I say, all right, f4, let's go for it. I'm not going to sit around here and wait for you to develop. We're going to attack. He thinks for another while and plays queen a5. He kind of needs to get out of the d file. And so I decided not to rush anything really. Now, maybe I could have already considered playing something like e5, trying to, sack a pawn to open things up. I just played king b1, which allowed him to long castle, which, is logical. Obviously, he wants to get his king out of the middle, but still looks weird. Like, he's missing a pawn here. His bishop is kind of awkward on b7. And my first instinct was, well, obviously I'm going to play e5, right? Because if he takes, I'm going to take twice, and then take, and his knight is pinned. I'm just winning a piece, right? Like, is that not just game over? But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, like, he's not just going to allow that to happen. I mean, this guy is, 2150 for a reason. I realized he has this move, bishop e7. And I can take the knight, but then my bishop gets trapped. So I decided that was no good. Now, is that the end of the story? Maybe not, because maybe I could have considered playing a move like f5, and giving the bishop back, but then trying to break open, if I can bust through the structure, maybe put a bishop on h3 could be pretty good. But I decided I didn't want to go for e5, and, this being the last round of the tournament and the second round of the day, I am feeling a bit fatigued, maybe not at my peak state. So I decided to play queen f2. I'm like, I'm going to shift onto this diagonal. I'm also going to not have my queen block the rook. He just played bishop e7. He's like, if you want to move your queen in, be my guest. You're not going to do anything over there. So I said, all right, we have to break through in some way, so let's play f5. If he takes, then he damages the structure. If he plays e5, maybe I can get my bishop onto c4, pressure the pawn on f7. He just goes king b8, though. He's like, go ahead and take. And I probably should have. I probably should have taken and then put my bishop on either h3 or c4 to now attack this kind of weak pawn on e6. I decided to play bishop c4 first, but this was the incorrect way to do things because I allowed him to now take, and now when I take back, he plays d5. And I definitely was not happy that I allowed him to do this because this solves a lot of problems for him. He no longer has a weakness on e6. His bishop is open. He has a pawn in the center. I'm forced to come back. And my advantage is all but gone. He just kind of gets his king to safety. And I play rook e1 trying to, keep him under some pressure. But there's not a whole lot more I can do. Like the fact that he has these center pawns, the d5 pawn is a really big asset for him. I decided, okay, let's try to maybe double or something. But he attacks my queen. I have to move. He trades. He comes back just to, safeguard the knight. I said, okay, let's play c3 just to solidify a little bit. I'm worried that he's going to play c5, c4, trap the bishop, so I go c3. He comes back. He's just staying solid. I decided to offer a queen trade. I was thinking maybe, if this is an endgame, maybe I can put the rook on the g-file, pressure g7. He just goes bishop d6. And here I made kind of an awkward move, which I don't like in hindsight, queen a4. I was thinking maybe I, start to attack the pawn on a6, maybe play c4, knight d4, but he just goes rook e8, and it quickly becomes apparent my queen is just out of position. Like, it's just stuck on a4. How does it get back into the game? And actually, if I move the knight, he can now play like knight e4, and things are just starting to get dicey for me. So I decided, let's just get rid of his knight, double his pawns. I have now passed h-pawn, maybe could be useful. And more importantly, I create a square for my queen to come back to defend the knight. But now he comes in with rook e4, and I'm not happy because he's taking over the game. I have to move my queen out of the way. He now controls the e-file. I move the knight. He doesn't want to play c5 because I'm just going to move the knight back, and now maybe d5 pawn is loose. Although maybe he could have played c4 here and kind of forced the bishop to a4. But he does have to deal with the backwards pawn now in d5. So he played rook e3. And like I said, tough position for me to play. Like, my pieces aren't very coordinated. No real way to get at his king. Just not a pleasant position to be in. I drop the bishop back, allowing my knight to retreat. Give him a check. I think, okay, let's start pushing the pawn. But now he starts to create some counterplay. He plays rook e1. And I can't take the rook because he's going to take with the queen. And when I block with the knight, bishop f4, GG. Knight's pinned. He's going to take next move. So I have to just leave it. I go back with the queen, basically guarding this diagonal. He decides to come back. He's attacking the bishop. And he's also threatening some nasty little tricks. Like, let's say I play knight c1. He has ideas where he might even sack the rook for the bishop and then come in with his queen. And if I block with the knight, he can play c4. I can't retreat to b1, which means I have to go to b3, but then king is wide open. Not to mention, if king d2, I mean, this just loses on the spot. So I played rook d2. I'm like, I'm not going to let him do any kind of nasty stuff like that. He repeats moves. He comes back. And now I decided, no, I'm not even going to go for a draw. I'm going to play queen g7. And let him take, because I figured that now I actually can go to c1, and if he gives a check, now I can block with the knight. So I should be fine. A little bit dicey, but I should be fine. He, however, finds a nice idea. He plays d4. Sacrificing the pawn to open the diagonal for his bishop and renewing some dangerous ideas of potentially sacrificing. I took, because I figured if he takes, he doesn't really have enough. I mean, I can still kind of duck out of the way. And block with the knight. But, even actually, can I do that? Maybe I have to go forward? I don't know. This position is pretty dangerous for me. I would have had to calculate very precisely. But he played bishop e4, pressuring my bishop, basically inviting me to take. I took and now put my king in the corner, and I'm aware at this point that my position is in not such great shape. I have to be very careful not to lose this. He plays rook e1, which, again, looks really bad, because if I take his rook, I get back rank mated. I basically have only one move, which doesn't lose, and that's to play rook c1, because I move my rook onto a square where the knight covers. If he takes and tries to attack the knight, at least I can bring the queen back. So he goes queen e3, attacks the rook. I go king b1. He gives a check, forcing me into the corner. But now he basically has to make a decision. Is he going to repeat, or is he going to take the rook and try to play for more? I was wondering if maybe he'll even go back and then play a move like c4, where my knight is basically forced to move. Well, if it moves away, he can take the rook. But then I realized I can still take on f7, and I have just enough counterplay. Because if he takes my knight, actually, he might even be getting mated. Well, actually, I can't move the rook, right? But maybe I can trade things, and I should be fine. It turns out, though, his best course of action would have been to not repeat, but to actually take, and then play queen f1, where he hits the knight and hits the pawn on f5. My only way to defend the knight would be to use the king, and then he can win both my pawns, but at the end of the day, it's still pretty much equal material, and maybe he's slightly better because I still have some back rank issues, but it's going to be pretty hard to win. So in the end, he decided just to repeat, and we settled on a draw. Not the most happy result for me, because I felt like I was pressing out of the opening, had maybe good chances, and then I kind of lost control over the game at some point, but at least I didn't lose like I was starting to get scared I might. So I finished the tournament on 5 out of 7, 7th place. Decent result overall, but considering the fact that I started on 4.5 out of 5, and I was kind of in the driver's seat of the tournament, not too much to be happy about. But we live and we learn. Chess tournaments are a lot about kind of stamina too, and you have to be able to play well consistently, not just in the first few games, but up until the very end. And that's something that I have to work on to win future tournaments. But I hope you enjoyed this recap. A lot of interesting tournament games have been played since, so stay tuned for those in upcoming recaps. Thanks for watching.